Yesterday, Rupert Lowe had his grooming gang inquiry debate hosted in Parliament. Rupert Lowe put forward a petition to argue for the mandatory gathering of racial, ethnic, religious, and national origin data for the perpetrators of child abuse offences. I have to be euphemistic in this video because YouTube will do all it can to suppress this information from getting out. But Rupert delivered 6 minutes of the most harrowing testimonies, the most horrifying stories, in a powerful speech to Parliament. And despite this, the MPs spent the rest of the debate talking about toxic masculinity, the manosphere, the need not to be prejudiced, the fact that, actually, white men commit a majority of the offences if I use these numbers to obfuscate the real problem, and therefore you're racist for even mentioning the grooming gangs. Only one man has been brave enough to keep his promise on the independent grooming gang inquiry. A few other MPs actually showed up and gave good contributions, speeches, interjections, so they should be praised, and they will be praised. But the majority of the people in the Houses of Parliament do not want to solve the problem. They instead want to deflect, deny, obfuscate, downplay, protect the reputation of the Pakistani community in Britain, which keeps generating these gangs, and also which broadly know about it, but in the words of Mohammed Shafiq, in 2016, the head of the Ramadan Foundation, who's long been a whistleblower on this to his credit, they want to stick their head in the sand because they don't want to be seen as siding with the white enemy. See my previous videos on these quotes. This is a community problem, and being honest about the statistics will result in a community-wide reckoning. And that's why they don't want the statistics to come out. But you have to listen to these horror stories. And then we have to listen to the statements and speeches made by the people in Parliament who would rather us not talk about this, and thereby are complicit in the problem still going on to this day, because the gangs are still operating. Most of them haven't been caught yet. We have to listen to this, because this is the worst crime ever perpetrated in British history. This is the worst scandal that our people have ever had to suffer. This is worse than the Viking invasions. It's worse than the Norman Conquest. It's worse than the Blitz. It's worse than any of the various serial killers operating through the 60s to the 2000s. This is the single worst crime ever committed against our people, and it's still happening. And lots of people in Parliament are still pretending it's not, and they shouldn't be allowed to. And some of the people in Parliament who didn't attend, weren't able to attend, because the room had a capacity of, I think, about 50. Some came and went. Nigel Farage gave his speech and then had to leave. But it is important to see who wasn't bothered enough to either try to show up or explain their absence. Because Rupert Lowe said, I expect every MP to attend our rape gang inquiry debate on Monday in Parliament. They've all been invited. Those who can't be bothered to come will be named. And we should credit those who did show up. But then, Lee Anderson decided to respond, myth-busting. At 4:30 PM, there is a Westminster Hall debate on an e-petition on the publication of child sexual offender data. I saw some people, some Reform surrogates, again, not all Reform supporters, but a couple of people, lying and saying Rupert didn't even generate the petition. He did. Which is why Jamie Stone, who chairs the e-petitions debates committee, pointed this out at the very start of the debate, actually. He had to clarify that as the chair of the petitions committee, it's always encouraging to see public participation in politics, and it had more than 200,000 signatures. And the petition was created by the honourable member for Great Yarmouth. At this point, I remind people the person leading a debate on behalf of the petitions committee sets the scene, as it were, so I will refer to the petitioner and to other points of the argument. So no, he didn't create the petition. It wouldn't be illegitimate if he did. It would actually be commendable for him to break rank with his party, who have hitherto continued to agitate for the importing of the perpetrators and called people racist for talking about it. He emphasised that Rupert Lowe created the petition, that hundreds of thousands of members of the public wanted this to be spoken about, and therefore, that this is an important issue. But Lee Anderson decided to try and say, oh, this debate does not belong to any MP, it is a petition debate, and will be opened by Jamie Stone from the Liberal Democrats. I've noticed some people are calling for all 650 MPs to attend. This is nonsense, as the room only allows for 50 MPs to sit in the Westminster Hall committee room. Okay, you could at least say why you can't attend, and say, this has hit capacity, here's what I would have said if I would have been able to speak, and just post it on Twitter. And then he said, this isn't helpful and is an insult to all the victims. The online political hijacking of a debate of this nature is very sad to see. The victims worked with Rupert Lowe to produce the inquiry. They gave him the testimonies that he read out in his speech, which I'll play in a minute. And I'll play in full because No summary can do it justice. That you're not going to get anything better from me describing what Rupert has said rather than me actually playing it. But Rupert responded, "You're wrong. It was a petition raised by Rupert on behalf of the Independent Rape Gang Inquiry, signed by 260,974 British men and women. Their support meant we forced the topic onto the parliamentary agenda. It's opened by Jamie Stone because he's the chair of the committee, as you well know. What you're saying is inaccurate. Last time, we had an event in Parliament for rape gang survivors to engage with MPs, and you didn't bother to show up. So, Lee Anderson and other members of Reform could have attended the inquiry. They were all invited, and they didn't. I think only Sarah Pochin responded, actually, to the invitation. They could have attended the broader event that wasn't the inquiry itself. They didn't. Labour MPs took the time to attend. Tory MPs took the time to attend. Carla Lockhart from the DUP took time to attend. She's a great MP, by the way. Just because she's from Northern Ireland, she doesn't get enough mention. But Reform didn't. On the same day, Lee Anderson posted a picture of him drinking pint in the pub instead. He said, MPs from various parties have supported our efforts, putting aside petty political differences to tackle this festering rape gang scandal. It's a disgrace that you refuse to do the same. So, perhaps you could say Lee Anderson didn't understand parliamentary procedure, that he was a disappointment in that he didn't attend previous debates or events. He did attend this one, to his credit, and he added some interjections. I don't think the interjections were that helpful, but he did actually attend. But Lee Anderson did not make the worst statement ahead of the inquiry, and it's important we talk about this, because I'm not indicting Reform's politicians for this. Suella Braverman, Nigel Farage, Lee Anderson, Robert Jenrick all showed up and made contributions. But Matt Goodwin said something really disgusting. In response to Raheem Kassam, who is a former member of UKIP, now lives in the US, runs a restaurant called Butterworth's in Washington, D.C., and is just Nigel Farage's loyalist. I don't think he would dispute that characterization. He said Rupert Lowe and Restore are basically the BNP light. And Matt Goodwin responded, "What is the point of a rape gang inquiry unless it's statutory? This is what nobody has realised regarding Rupert Lowe, either because they are too dumb or they don't care about doing the hard yards to get the actual change those girls and their families deserve." Reminder, the inquiry was spearheaded by Sammy Woodhouse, a rape gang survivor who had a child by her rapist and has been fighting to block rapists from getting visitation rights to their children. It was well attended by many survivors who had never told their stories before, had never had their stories told by a politician before on their behalf in Westminster, who supported the inquiry financially or with their testimonies because they knew that this was important to force Parliament to recognise the worst scandal ever perpetrated in our country. And that's why Sammy Woodhouse is below saying, "I can't believe you're too dumb to realise you don't need statutory powers to help people and achieve things." This is also something, as Basil points out, that Nigel Farage promised in January 2025 and then neglected to carry out. Rupert Lowe actually kept the promise that Reform made while he was still in Reform to carry out the privately funded inquiry on a fraction of the budget that the government is currently conducting its limited statutory inquiries on, spearheaded by a woman who previously supervised a Children's Commissioner's report that again said white men are mainly to blame for this, and then tried to hire the author of that report to do another inquiry with £134,000 severance pay, and then rehired her on a consultancy fee of £960 a day. Oh, and Baroness Anne Longfield, who is, again, in charge of the inquiry that the Labour government are conducting, they're dragging their feet to actually start carrying out, announce the other locations that they're targeting, and they don't want to publish the findings until 2029. Anne Longfield previously celebrated that exams were being moved to accommodate Ramadan. So she's very happy with religious and racial sensitivities concerning the perpetrator demographic. Anyway, Rupert Lowe decided to do it on a shoestring budget compared to that, has made significant gains on the issue, is going to publish the full inquiry report in the coming month, and again has forced the government to address the issue with an oversubscribed Westminster Hall debate where he told the harrowing stories of the victims. And I pointed this out to Matt Goodwin, and I said, were the victims who participated too dumb to realise that Rupert's inquiry didn't have statutory powers, Matt? Because I think they realised that. Because Rupert said we don't have statutory powers over and over, but that he will pursue private prosecutions where possible. Should they not have bothered to show up to share their stories? And also, the other important thing is, would a Reform government not use the inquiry's findings to identify the culprits and institutions complicit in covering up the crimes if a Reform government then launched a statutory inquiry as Reform and Matt Goodwin have promised? Would they just ignore the rape gang inquiry's unique and useful findings about the national organised crime and trafficking network established by Pakistani drug dealers ever since the 50s and broadened out to other Muslim ethnicities like Kurds, Iraqis, Afghanis, operating out of Turkish barbers, car washes, vape shops, phone shops, engaging in the smuggling trade, but also engaging in the drug and trafficking trade. Would they just ignore those findings? Would they start from ground zero and just throw out all the testimonies of the survivors? I wouldn't think that they would, and they would be right not to. So clearly then, it's not dumb or useless. Are private prosecutions pointless? I asked. If so, why did Reform successfully threaten one in the Manchester airport assault case, and promise a private inquiry and prosecutions for the grooming gangs? Partisanship has driven you to say something ugly here. You might think it makes everyone who supported and participated in the inquiry look foolish, but far more people will see you as callous and vindictive. And Matt responded, your party is all over the place on everything from this to ILR to deportations to ex-Tories and you know it. You're wasting your time, bookmark this tweet. I want you to come back and look at it in 10 years when you realise the only thing you were doing was helping the left. So I responded to this, pointing out Matt didn't address anything I said in the post. He talked past the problem. He has a habit of doing this on television, by the way. When someone puts a direct charge to him, for example, when he was in a debate about AI hallucinated quotations in his latest book, he kept not addressing the core claim that the quotes were hallucinations and that he'd misattributed them and that he didn't actually write the book himself. And instead he kept saying that the establishment doesn't want me to write this book, that's why it's so important, and waving it around as a glorified advertisement. And it comes across as insincere. It comes across as having wrote, learned, and rehearsed your lines ahead of time. Much like his wrote, learned, and rehearsed attacks on myself and my friends who actually run Restore Britain, saying, we're irrelevant, we're extreme, they demand mass deportations, and they'll be laughed away on the doorstep, even though that's a core Reform promise. And he did the podcast circuit, going around saying that over and over, and rubbed people up the wrong way. If you don't address the substantive claim, then people will notice that you're trying to slip something past them, and instead they'll listen to the people that are making the substantive claims, that are keeping their promises, like Rupert did with the grooming gang inquiry. I said, your partisanship is making you swing wildly, grab for any insult you think might stick, in the hopes of killing off a threat to an easy, uncontested path to power. Insinuating that rape gang victims are dumb for participating in Rupert's inquiry should be beneath you, and I'm ashamed I ever thought you would be a good MP. Notice that I didn't make a partisan attack on Reform here, despite them not keeping their promise. And it's because I hope if Reform do end up winning government, they use the findings of Rupert's inquiry. Matt responded, saying, how dare you suggest I've insulted the victims of the rape gangs? I have talked about the Pakistani Muslim rape gangs every week on GB News. I've given speeches across the country about it, including in universities, when it made him persona non grata, and I was one of the first people in Britain to demand the deportation of dual national groomers in early 2024 when it then became Reform policy. Me, I. Let me be clear, Connor. I was calling you and other senior Restore activists dumb, people who are grandstanding, thinking they will solve this scandal by holding a non-statutory inquiry that is simply too weak. You are a really horrible person. If you want the truth and justice for the rape gangs, then vote Reform, get a full statutory national inquiry, and hold all those officials, including officials Restore is now helping escape justice by helping Andy Burnham, to account. So another partisan, egocentric attack that deflects from the fact that yes, by saying people are too dumb to realise that the inquiry has non-statutory powers, you were implicating rape gang survivors in the group of people you were calling too dumb because they supported, contributed to, and have since praised the inquiry. So yes, Matt, you were calling them dumb by implication, and now you're just launching vindictive personal attacks on me for pointing it out. And so I concluded with this, just saying, look, I never accused Matt of being silent on the issue. I simply said calling the inquiry and those who participated in it and supported it dumb was wrong. I asked a question. Were the rape gang victims dumb for having participated in and praised that non-statutory private inquiry? Furthermore, would Reform use its findings to inform their statutory inquiry if they were to form a government? I would hope so, in which case it's neither dumb nor pointless. In lashing out at Restore, you said something objectionable. In your response to me, you ignored the questions, went to motive an insult, and didn't clarify. You have a habit of talking past a point and attacking an interlocutor. It's a good tactic for television, but it's not about me and you, in this case. It's about the rape gang victims who had an opportunity to tell their stories for the first time at the inquiry, which you have dismissed to score partisan points. And Matt responded by saying, you're being disingenuous and you know it. Done here. No contrition, no apology, no recognition that actually the rape gang inquiry did some valuable work according to the survivors themselves. And I don't think we can maintain this attitude and actually solve the problem. Just as I don't think we can maintain the attitude that prioritises community cohesion or racial relations or political correctness over catching the gangs, bringing them to justice, deporting the family members who have covered it up, and no longer importing the perpetrators. I don't think we can solve the problem if you prioritize claims of racism over the violent crimes committed against our women and girls. So that was a thread that was running pretty consistently throughout the rape gang debate. Because the first major contributor following Jamie Stone's opening remarks was the Labour MP Jonathan Brash. And he said, oh, of course, child exploitation is one of the most vile, destructive, and unforgivable crimes imaginable. But then he decided to dilute the debate by broadening the parameters out to talking about how the majority of child abuse offences are committed in the home, or by a family member, or someone that's already known to the victim. And yes, that's true. In normal times, we would be talking about that. All of those instances are atrocious. But the reason that's being brought up is to distract from the narrative that implicates the Pakistani communities that Labour has relied on for votes for decades, from implicating the broader project of multiculturalism and diversity embarked upon by previous Labour governments, including the post-war Labour government, but especially Tony Blair's Labour government since 1997, when they said they wanted to rub the right's nose of diversity and render its arguments out of date. Subsequently by Boris Johnson's government, who conducted the Boris Wave. And now by Keir Starmer's government, who says to be British is to be diverse. And it also implicates the Labour Party themselves, because their local councils, the police force is controlled by their police and crime commissioners, including Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, and the Police and Crime Commissioner for Greater Manchester Police, where, in whose broader Greater Manchester Authority, the rape gangs have been operating in places like Oldham, who is currently running in Makerfield to become an MP and then unseat Keir Starmer as leader of the Labour Party and become Prime Minister by coronation. They want to deflect from this scandal because it reflects poorly on their party. They are making defensive partisan political points, just as, frankly, I think Matt Goodwin was about reform, trying to turn the rape gang inquiry into an exercise in saying, well, actually, Rupert Lowe's efforts are pointless, and he's actually indistinct from the BNP, who themselves are actually correct about the rape gangs, but by the by. And so you should ignore him and just vote reform instead. The same attitude is being demonstrated by Labour MPs and Liberal Democrat MPs throughout this debate. He says, this is, again, Jonathan Brash, let me make a second point very clear. This debate must be about victims, not about political point scoring, and not about narrowing or distorting the problem. He defines talking about the Pakistani Muslim, predominantly Pakistani Muslim, rape gangs as narrowing the problem, as distracting from the broader problem. But the problem is that previous inquiries have broadened the horizons of the scope of the inquiry and not tackled this specific problem. And it's because they're not prepared to talk about it in specific ways, such as the racial and religious motivations of the perpetrators, such as the clan morality of Pakistani communities that causes them to cover up the crimes, such as the complicity of politicians like Dennis McShane, of police and crime commissioners, social workers, the NHS, the media, in covering up the crime, because they are in favour of multiculturalism and, as Dennis McShane said, too much of a Guardian-reading liberal lefty to admit the real problem. And so what he's doing is actually distracting from the issue while saying we don't want to narrow the issue down to one specific thing that scapegoats a community and prevents victims from being protected. Actually, not being willing to indict the community that produces the perpetrators and covers it up is producing the crimes. And Suella Braverman pointed this out. Again, to her credit, she did some good work while Home Secretary on the grooming gangs. She established a task force that identified, I think, 1,500 likely perpetrators, arrested 500 people, and protected 4,000 victims in the first year it was operating. And she said she was proud of that, but just for daring to tell the truth that in places like Rotherham, these were racialized crimes perpetrated largely by Pakistani Muslim men against white girls, I was attacked by, it has to be said, my own Conservative Party colleagues for being Islamophobic and for amplifying a far-right narrative. That includes Baroness Saeeda Vorsi, by the way, who attacked Braverman in The Guardian. Joined the Muslim Council of Britain in saying that Braverman was incorrect. The Muslim Council of Britain launched an IPSO complaint against the Daily Mail and Suella Braverman. And even though it wasn't upheld, the Daily Mail corrected her article, or censored it, rather. And Braverman has asked the Muslim Council of Britain, in light of Baroness Casey's review last year, to issue a retraction, and they haven't apologised to survivors, of course, because they only care about protecting the reputation of Muslims in Britain and preserving their privileged social and legal standing and political presence. They don't care about solving the problem. Anyway, she said, does the honourable gentleman agree that ethnicity reporting is essential if we are to combat the institutional fear that has taken over the police, social workers, schools, parts of our media and political parties, and if we are to get justice for victims? And he said, in weasel words, I say very clearly, nobody should be castigated for highlighting a truth that is self-evident, a truth. But I will also reveal another truth, that the vast majority of perpetrators are not from grooming gangs or ethnic minority backgrounds. It is of genuine concern to me that we do not narrow the focus of this debate. Your concern is primarily with the reputations of the Pakistani communities that perpetrate and cover up these crimes, rather than the safety of the victims themselves. Because you don't want to focus on it, so you don't want to solve the problem. This should not be possible. If you live in Jonathan Brash's constituency, send him an email. Send him an email with any of the sources from my previous reporting, anything that Charlie Peters has done, anything that Andrew Norfolk did, or Peter McLaughlin, or anyone else that's done superlative work on this issue. And Jonathan Brash sat through the testimonies read out by Rupert Lowe. And I'm going to play a speech in full, because everyone needs to hear this. Nobody should be allowed to forget it, and nobody should be allowed to be inactive after hearing what these people have done to our girls.
Firstly, I would like to thank the 260,974 British men and women who signed the petition to make this debate possible, and I want to welcome these brave survivors who are sitting behind us in the hall. This debate is about them. As you quite rightly say, it's not about politics. I want the world to hear what we heard during the 2 weeks of our independent rape gang inquiry hearings, an inquiry that should never have needed to happen. I sincerely urge this Parliament to listen to the testimonies from these brave survivors and to act, to finally act. So the first testimony: he took his pants down, penetrated me, had sex with me. He then stopped before ejaculation. He picked up the bottle of Jack Daniels, which was now empty, and he forced it up inside me. He broke the glass while he was there. At that point, I was about 12, nearly 13. Another testimony: I was held down by the men as they each took turns to orally and vaginally rape me, taking it in turns to pin down my arms and my legs. When the assault ended, the men hit me repeatedly, threatened to find me, kill me, and harmed my loved ones if I ever told anybody what had happened. Another: comments were constantly made suggesting that white girls, the Christian girls, were viewed as having fewer morals or lower values, whereas Muslim girls were described by some of the men as having dignity and higher moral standing. These comparisons were used to justify the way I was treated and to further humiliate and control me. Another: she was a white woman herself, who I imagine may have been groomed, and has obviously now married into the family, shouting obscenities at us. Throughout the whole sentencing, she was constantly saying, "Fucking liars, lying white bitches." She said to me that God will be the witness for what happens to me. Another: race did play a part and motivated the selection or demographic of the victims. Throughout my exploitation, the other girls I encountered, or who were abused alongside me, were almost exclusively white. Another: she had a baby by him, and his dad was an imam. His dad knew, and he got his son married and said that he wasn't allowed to see the child. They look after their own community. Another: over the course of the abuse, I was raped by multiple police officers in different parts of the country. Another: he put a cigarette out on the baby's face. Another: it started when I was 13. I was raped by probably about 600 or 700 different men over 3 years. Another: they would toot the horn of the car, and then a child would be taken to the front door by a staff member of the children's home. Another. I was bleeding from both my vagina and my back passage and was so swollen I could not sit down. I told hospital staff my drink had been spiked and I did not know what had happened because I was too afraid to tell the truth. They did not ask any questions. They gave me tablets and discharged me. I was 15 years old. Another. Things would escalate around Eid and holidays. Parties got bigger, got worse, got more violent. More people involved, more girls involved. The parties were just bigger. Another. The main clash that I kind of had with the religion side of it was I grew up as a Christian. I would wear my cross because it was something really special to me. It was just used as a way to break me down. They said, "Where is your God now? Has your God forsaken you?" Another. It was all of the white girls in every home that I went to. I remember a man opening the back of a van and I saw 15, 20 girls locked in dog cages. Another. Dogs were brought in and I couldn't move at all. I had nowhere to move. I think that was the scariest thing, was not having any concept of it. There were men around me, not horrified, not disgusted, not helping, but filming and laughing, making bets on whether the dog could actually rape me or not. And yes, I was raped by a dog. The man just held my face, stared me down straight in the eyes, and he wanted to see me break, and he did. Another. I just want it to stop and not happen to any other children, and for people to actually act, to do something and stop being so scared. I could continue for hours and hours. All of us in this building have a responsibility to finally act. Not to talk, but to act. Our Rape Gang Inquiry report will be released in the coming days. It will change Britain for good. Thank you.
So it will horrify you that afterwards, Ayoub Khan, the independent Muslim MP for Birmingham Perry-Barr, who has previously been photographed, by the way, socialising with one of the convicted rape gang perpetrators, and who last year said that the rape gangs are a false narrative fabricated by the far right at a gathering of Pakistani clans in Birmingham agitating for building a new airport to Mirpur. Mirpur is the region where the majority of the perpetrators actually hail from in Pakistan. Ayoub Khan, sitting next to Rupert Lowe during the debate, got up and delivered pre-prepared remarks, which I think were based on the cadence written by ChatGPT. And the entire thing was an exercise in deflecting away from the complicity of Pakistanis in the crimes, blaming white men, using broad statistics to say actually white men commit the majority of these offences, not talking about group-based child exploitation, not focusing on the religious and racial aggravation of the crimes, because of course that implicates the community that he sees himself as an ambassador for, who are his primary concern, whose good standing and continued recipiency of state funding and legal protections are his primary concern. And instead, he accused people that want to talk about the rape gangs of being far less interested in victims than in validating their own hatred of ethnic minorities, Muslims, migrants, and foreign nationals, and that it would be obscene to implicate white men in this specific kind of crime by saying, well, the majority of these perpetrators are white men, therefore all white men commit this kind of crime. Completely deflects, of course, from per capita, and I think at this point, it's not that he doesn't understand it, it's that just he's engaging in taqiyya. Lying, face-saving, to advantage Islam and Pakistanis in Britain. And he says, when people insist on doing exactly that to Pakistani, Muslim, Asian or migrant communities, they're not following the evidence, they're revealing a prejudice. And we must reject the idea that rape, abuse or grooming are the products of select or even inferior ethnicities, religions and nationalities. They're crimes committed by human beings. Just human beings! You can't have a targeted strategy that protects victims based on a demographic and prosecutes perpetrators based on a demographic. You can't have an effective strategy because that would be racist.
Because it would be obscene policy and an obscene politics to draw sweeping conclusions about communities of millions from the crimes around 16,000 of the most depraved individuals in our society. So when people insist on doing exactly that to Pakistani, Muslim, Asian or migrant communities, they are not following the evidence. They are revealing a prejudice. They are not interested in protecting children. They're interested in blaming communities. That does not mean we ignore cases involving Asian men, Muslims, foreign nationals, or anyone else. It means the opposite. It means we investigate all of it. It means we prosecute all of it. It means we do not allow any community to hide behind discomfort, political embarrassment, or fear of reputational damage. But it also means we reject the grotesque idea that rape, abuse, or groomings are the product of select or even inferior ethnicities, religions, or nationalities. These are crimes committed by human beings. They are rooted in power, misogyny, coercion, and the exploitation of vulnerability. They are not committed by just Muslims, migrants, and minorities. Far from it. And if we are going to talk about consistency, well, let's talk about consistency. When John Ashby raped a Sikh woman in Warsaw, he did so while directing Islamophobic abuse at her because he believed she was Muslim. That was not incidental. It was part of the terror inflicted on the victim. Yet many of the very people who are usually desperate to talk about ethnicity and religion suddenly changed their view. They said rape is rape. They criticized media outlets for making it about religion. Suddenly the victim's identity and the hate-driven nature of the attack was cleansed and downplayed. But when the perpetrator is Asian, Muslim, or foreign, those same people insist that identity is everything. That is not a concern for victims. That is selective outrage. When the victim is from a minority community, they tell us not to mention her race or religion. When the perpetrator is from a minority community, they tell us his race or religion explains the crime. That double standard should shame anyone who claims to care about justice. And I say this plainly. Celebrating or minimizing the rape of women because she's Sikh or because she's presumed to be a Muslim is vile. Denying religiously or racially aggravated nature of such a crime is vile. It is not British. It is not patriotic. And it's not about protecting women and girls. I support better data collection. But unlike some, I do so because I'm consistent and because facts matter. I support it because bad data creates a vacuum, and that vacuum is either filled by denial or by hatred, and we should not tolerate either. The government must ensure that ethnicity and nationality data is collected accurately, consistently, and nationally. It must ensure that safeguarding agencies share intelligence properly. It must ensure the victims and survivors are believed, supported, and protected. It must ensure that local authorities, police forces, schools, health services, and prosecutors cannot fail children because they are afraid of asking difficult questions. The victims of child sexual abuse deserve better than to be turned into ammunition in a culture war. They deserve justice, and above all, they deserve honesty. They deserve a system that is brave enough to collect the facts and decent enough not to twist those facts into bigotry. So let us have transparency, let us collect the data, and let us publish what can properly and safely be published. But we must do it for the right reason, to support survivors and to bring offenders to justice, not to feed hatred or attribute these crimes to certain communities. This is a problem that everyone in our society shares and a problem that we all bear. It belongs to all of us to prevent it, and it belongs to members to confront it with facts, consistency, and compassion. Thank you, Chair.
It's actually a damning indictment of Parliament that the Chair themselves didn't interject, or didn't compel Khan to take the interjections from the number of members of Parliament who tried to intervene and challenge his lies. It's damning that they allowed him to say the victims of child abuse deserve better than to be turned into ammunition in a culture war. Ayoub Khan should be denaturalised and deported. And the longer he insists that we don't focus on this problem, I warn him, the higher the likelihood is. Because if you aren't willing to allow the population to discriminate on the basis of behaviour, as I think we should, then they're just going to start doing blanket expulsions. Because this is as close to a collective crime perpetrated by one community against another that we're ever going to get, that we've ever seen in our history. And collective guilt will elicit the response of a collective punishment. Nigel Farage then delivered a speech, and he was correct to point out that Parliament haven't used their statutory powers since 2011 by the Public Accounts Committee to investigate the 2008 global financial crash, and that they should actually convene a parliamentary committee, regardless of party affiliation, to recognise the upset, concern and fear of our constituents that we're increasingly living in a two-tier justice system, come together and force the government to have a powerful committee in this place. And despite Nigel Farage's animosity with Rupert Lowe, having previously called the police on Rupert Lowe, or at least Zia Youssef did, because Rupert Lowe called for deporting the communities that covered up the rape gangs. So despite previously breaking his promise about the private inquiry and trying to put Rupert Lowe in prison for actually trying to do something about it, hopefully Nigel Farage, if what he's pushing for goes through, hopefully he will be willing to work alongside Rupert Lowe on this. Hopefully, if a reform government does win power, and Rupert Lowe retains Great Yarmouth, and actually picks up some seats in some select constituencies for Restore Britain, as that's the current polling, as it stands, hopefully Reform will be willing to provide them with committee seats, because we've already seen the excellent work that Rupert Lowe has done, whether or not Matt Goodwin would like to acknowledge it. And then we get to Cameron Thomas, Liberal Democrat MP. Liberal Democrats are particularly cowardly, lily-livered, vile, in fact. They are the party of luxury beliefs because the diversity hasn't enriched their own back gardens yet. And during the debate, Cameron Thomas, the Liberal Democrat MP for Tewkesbury, said, "I am proud of the enrichment that cultural diversity has brought to our own, as well as the fact that the UK leads much of the world in our elevation of women. But why pretend that integration is frictionless, or that any two cultures are perfectly compatible?" The charge he levies, of course, is that Pakistani communities are insufficiently liberal, progressive. They're not going to be. You don't understand them, you don't understand how they think. They're indigestible, they are incompatible. They must be expelled. There is no other way to have peace. There is no other way to have the kind of civilization that he wants. And during his speech, not only did he say, the issue has been weaponized by the far right, deployed by its propagandists to sow racial, cultural and religious division. As if people complaining about the problem are the ones driving the division, rather than the communities perpetrating the crimes based on the fact they feel divided between us and them, and that you can never bring us together. I have nothing in common with the Pakistani grooming gang perpetrators, or the family members who have conspired to cover it up, because they hate white girls. They think they deserve it, because by Allah, they dress so immodestly. Again, as I've covered time and time again on this channel in previous essays, I have nothing in common with those people. So the division exists prior to me and other people. Presumably, he's thinking here of Rupert Lowe and Tommy Robinson, pointing it out. But then Hannah Spencer intervened. And Hannah Spencer, again, who was elected based on galvanising the Pakistani and Bangladeshi bloc vote in Gorton and Denton. Hannah Spencer decided to give a little speech. And she had prepared to give some remarks, but she decided to, I think, relinquish the ability to do so, because I think she got pretty much everything out that she wanted to while giving this question. She said, "Sowing division will not keep children safe. Does the honourable member agree that the next steps must be guided by listening to survivors and fostering a culture in which women and girls are believed?" Problem is, Hannah, the survivors themselves have been the ones saying, as Rupert Lowe read out, "I was targeted because I was white, because I was Christian, because I was vulnerable. All of my abusers were Muslims, most of them Pakistani men." The problem is, Hannah, if you listen to women and girls, they're going to implicate your voters. They're going to implicate the people who you pandered to in Urdu in order to get elected to Parliament. So, Hannah Spencer doesn't give a damn, actually. And I don't say that lightly, but I really don't think she cares. Because when it comes to an inflection point between implicating the Pakistani communities that have done the crimes and listening to the victims, she will always try to sand off the edges of the victims' narratives and therefore not try and solve the problem. And then Cameron Thomas responded, saying, "I often feel self-conscious about bringing this issue forward as a man, when really we should be listening to the voices of women and girls, particularly those who have been victims of these crimes." Okay, when the victims are saying, "Hey, men, please pack my perpetrators on a plane or send them to the gallows," are you going to listen to them then? Because they are. They're telling Rupert that, which is the reason why Rupert Lowe conducted the inquiry, which is the reason why he had this debate. It's the reason why he established his party, Restore Britain, after the inquiry, having previously only planned to create a non-partisan movement to pressure existing parties to act on these issues, because he saw that pretty much every existing political party is implicated in covering up this crime and won't address the problem. So he's on a one-man moral crusade try and fix the issue. And it's hard to say after, again, yesterday, that even his critics about splitting the vote, or accusing him of being more interested in his own vanity than fixing the country and allying with reform, it's hard to say he doesn't have credibility on this issue. That he is the most credible person in Parliament on this issue. But then Cameron Thomas disgracefully used his speech to attack Lowe and Elon Musk. I'll play the clip.
I fully endorse her comments, and I often feel self-conscious bringing this issue forward as a man, when really we should be listening to the voices of women and girls, particularly, of course, those who have been victims of these crimes. Victims of domestic and sexual abuse, exploitation and trafficking deserve to be treated with compassion and with sincerity. Their tragedies should not be a foundation over which clamber opportunistic and ambitious politicians desperate to score political points over their opponents, as did the Conservative Party in January 2025. It is a continuing tragedy that these cases are most vociferously contested by thugs who attack police and defile our national emblems, by political opportunists, and by hostile foreign commentators who call for civil war and violent uprisings against the elected government. They rarely, if ever, consider the victims. Social media commentators periodically ask me, "What are you doing about grooming gangs?" They never ask me what I'm doing for the victims. Elon Musk's interest in the 2024 summer riots and the unimaginable crimes they followed was not in the protection of women and girls. Rather, it was based upon his apartheid nostalgic white supremacism. Musk's concern for women and girls only extends to his own attempt to exploit them, as evidenced through his reluctantly public exchanges with sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein. That brings me to the member for Great Yarmouth, and again I feel self-conscious for delivering this from behind him. Despite Musk's relationship with paedophile Jeffrey Epstein, the member for Great Yarmouth continues to publicly court him, and last year he was paid £40,000 by Elon Musk through his platform X, the same platform over which Musk provoked those riots in 2024. In closing, Dame Siobhan, let us bring forward this motion. Let the evidence show that I'm sure most sexual abuse of this kind does occur within the family, but let the evidence show where it does not, and let us act upon it as one.
Yet again, Cameron Thomas used his time to whine about white supremacy and the spectre of apartheid, more than focusing on the racial and religious motivations of the gangs targeting vulnerable white girls. And again, at any point, people might say, okay, well, they pre-prepared these remarks before they knew what Rupert was going to say. If you had any integrity, if you weren't just a fucking NPC, you might have just shredded your remarks and spoken from the heart. You might have had the contrition to admit that what Rupert said had changed your mind. You might have said, I am humble enough to say that I wanted to speak on behalf of my constituents, and I thought I was doing the right thing by condemning people that are using the issue to sow division. But actually, the crimes are so horrible that I've been neglecting this issue. I haven't introspected about the role that my beliefs played in creating a chilling effect on talking about the issue, and then, thereby, trying to solve it, rather than just having a perpetual national conversation, because this issue keeps being discussed every few years. Action is deferred through promised reports and recommendations that never get implemented. And instead, he could have said, Madam Chair, I relinquish my time because I actually think that I don't have anything to say. The Right Honourable Member from Great Yarmouth has said, by just be reading out the testimonies of the victims, all that needs to be said, and now we need to act. You could have done that. But instead, you wanted to, whinge about Elon Musk. Pathetic. You will be remembered as a traitor. When we solve this problem, and we have to, because our children never forgive us, my sole motivation is to protect my wife and children from being the victims of one of these arbitrary atrocities. And if I fail in that, they're right not to forgive me. If all of us fail in this, they're right not to forgive us. But if we succeed, we will make sure that just as the names of the victims are memorialized, the names of all of the people guilty of this, they they will be memorialized too. They will be remembered for their treachery. There'll be black marks against their name in the history books. Just as there have been, Holocaust museums in every major city. Just as Dachau and Auschwitz are sites for, I don't want to say tourist attractions, but they're essentially museums, right? To uphold a moral narrative. We should do the same for the grooming gangs. Because this is the single worst crime ever perpetrated against us. Rupert Lowe was right. This is, for the British people, our equivalent of the Holocaust. And yesterday, a bunch of MPs decided to engage in grooming gang denial. They decided to talk about second-order consequences. Incidental concerns. Like the mean words put to these communities that commit these crimes. The negative opinions we might hold about Pakistanis in Britain after what they've done. Just unforgivable. Our leadership class is all implicated either by direct participation in the cover-up or by cowardice. The type of cowardice displayed by Cameron Thomas. Credit to Robbie Moore, by the way, who kept pressing the government on whether or not they're going to include Keighley as a location in their limited national inquiry. He's been working with Fiona Goddard and her father, Marlon West, in pushing for this, so Robbie Moore has done excellent work. He's a fantastic MP. And Rupert Lowe pointed out that Robbie Moore made a great point, that he's been in touch with the government and Baroness Longfield, and has said that the independent inquiry is happy to help, and so far nobody's contacted him. And that's the most damning part of this entire debate. The government doesn't care enough to take all of the evidence available to them and carry it forward. I mean, I'm not saying the inquiry is redundant. A proper statutory national inquiry would be valuable. But they haven't even taken all the information that Rupert Lowe has compiled and decided to bring forward, via the Attorney General, prosecutions, investigations into the people that have been named. The testimonies that, of course, weren't able to be aired because they disclosed private information, they named people that have committed crimes that have not been named publicly yet. They haven't been charged, they haven't been investigated, they haven't been convicted. We're not going after them. The government has the power to. They just don't care. When Rupert Lowe says, I don't care, it's about the reputation he has among those people. The people that will launder the slur, racist and white supremacist and far right, that have shut down the conversation for a very long time. What he does care about is the victims, their families, our country, our families who might fall prey to this. Because it's only a matter of time before these gangs are everywhere, because it's just the inevitable consequence of spreading this demographic across our country. Robert Jenrick then made some comments. He said that he supports locking up the perpetrators with mandatory whole life sentences, something he pushed for while he was Shadow Justice Minister in the Conservative Party, something he should be lauded for. He said we should change the law, make these individuals, these vile perpetrators, serve the rest of their lives in prison. That's the least the victims deserve. I agree with Rupert Lowe, bring back the death penalty. And he says, lastly, we should strip citizenship from dual nationals and deport them far away from these shores. If countries will not take them back, as some do not wish to, why on earth are our constituents paying millions of pounds in foreign aid to these countries? No, better than that. Way better than that. Strip every last citizenship granted to every single Pakistani implicated in the scandal, whether they perpetrated the crime or they knew about it and covered it up. Then, force Pakistan to take them back. Use any financial penalties, sanctions, taxes on remittances, any leverage we have to ensure that happens. Just get rid of these people. Because otherwise they'll just renounce their dual citizenship, become sole British citizens, and then suddenly they'll have to go, oh, shucks, I guess we're stuck with them. Because this happened previously with the perpetrators of the 2013 Rochdale gang, where they renounced their Pakistani citizenship, they became British citizens, and so they were just left to rot in prison, and some of them are out now. We just shouldn't have these people here at all. And these are powers enjoyed by the Home Secretary. She's already done it to an English man with also Russian citizenship, stranding him in Russia despite not being ethnically Russian. So, given Pakistan will take these people back if enough pressure is applied on them, we should do that to all of them. Every last one. Every last person implicated in this scandal. And we should be allowed to live in peace. And if you don't have the courage to call for that, then I'm sorry, you're just getting in the way. Though, of course, Robert Jenrick might have a little bit more credibility on this issue if he weren't the previous Conservative government's immigration minister who supervised the importing of thousands of Taliban fighters and sex offenders from Afghanistan, taking out super injunction against the public to prevent the press from reporting on it and we taxpayers from knowing about it. Meanwhile, he was writing in the Telegraph that welcoming said men in was a national project. And then, in the last week, 7 of said Afghans have been charged with child offences as part of a grooming gang operating in Norwich. And then, one of the most disgraceful contributions was again made by a Liberal Democrat MP. The Liberal Democrats are like one of the most reprehensible parties in the country. They are truly disgusting. Tessa Munn, who previously shrieked in Parliament last year when we were having this debate, saying it is white men that are guilty of this crime. She was incandescent with rage that anyone dare mention the Pakistani background and the Muslim faith of the majority of the grooming gang perpetrators.
Testimonies. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I say my blood is boiling listening to this stuff coming from the Conservative benches. If they had read the ICSA, the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse, they would recognise that there are hundreds of thousands of people alive today, people just like me, white girls who suffered at the hands of white men, and they've just got clean away with it because nothing was done for so long. I welcome the statement that was made today. I think it's absolutely brilliant.
She decided to go on a very long speech about victim and perpetrator demographics. Didn't dig into the explicit disparity between white girls and Pakistani men. But then towards the end, she said the police must receive compulsory training to recognise what can be done to challenge what is colloquially referred to as the manosphere and to challenge toxic masculinity. Weirdly enough, there's not a lot of manosphere content in Pakistan, but there is a lot of child and cousin marriage, a lot of rape, a lot of sexual violence. There is throughout the Muslim world. Weirdly, this isn't the consequence of Andrew Tate clips. No matter how odious I might find his output as a former pornographer, now turned Muslim influencer. Weird how his faith is never mentioned there. This is not a product of abstract forces of patriarchy. Your 2010s feminist rhetoric will not solve this problem. In fact, it is one of the reasons that a cordon sanitaire around the scandal has been placed. These are petty distractions, and you are disgraceful for even mentioning them. And again, if you live in Tessa Munn's constituency, send her an email saying you are focusing on trivialities and you haven't named the problem. Every single MP who spoke in this debate, if you are their constituent, you should send them an email, either praising their contributions and compelling them to work further with the private inquiry and pressure the government on the fact that the public inquiries are insufficient, willfully inadequate, or you should point out that they have been cowards. Because otherwise nothing gets done. And then Natalie Fleet decided to represent the government at the end. She is now the Parliamentary Undersecretary of State for the Home Office since Jess Phillips resigned. And she delivered her remarks complaining about people spreading lies and misinformation about the composition of the perpetrators versus the victims. She delivered the entire thing using a very put-on affect. She's not a very good public speaker. Came across very insincere. And she said that the actions of a minority of men must not be allowed to marginalise or demonise entire communities. The communities know. They cover it up. They raise the perpetrators. They encourage it. Baroness Gohir's 2013 Muslim Women's Network report details how they treated one of their own, actually. A girl, presumably drugged, was kept captive in a Pakistani home, and a friend brought his friend back to the apartment, and over the course of about 6 or 7 hours, they phoned their friends and relatives. One man showed up with his son in school uniform to allow his son to have a formative sexual experience with the girl. She was gang raped for hours, and they only stopped because they said, "Bro, I don't think anyone's going to want to marry her." We can't live with these people. They don't belong here. They've done too much damage. They just have to go. And as for the perpetrators themselves, well, I agree with Rupert Lowe. I think we should save money on their plane tickets. He posted yesterday. For those mainly Pakistani men who have inflicted the very worst pain imaginable on innocent British children, please know this. There will come a day when the power of the British state that concealed your atrocious crimes for so very long is turned against you. It will be swift, it will be brutal, it will be severe. Because if Restore Britain gets a sniff of power, there will be a reckoning. I promise you that. We will show the same mercy you showed to our girls. Your race or religion will not protect you anymore. A message will be sent that is heard right across the world. If you rape our children, you will pay for it, and you will pay for it with everything. That is what Restore Britain will do. And so I'm not turning this into a party political broadcast. I do have a vote of confidence in Rupert's character to keep his promises, because he has kept his promises here. But what I hope happens is for Rupert's speech in the forthcoming report to be a landmark development in this national scandal. And if it isn't, then when the day of reckoning eventually comes, all of those that tried to prevent it from being the turning point in this scandal will be remembered for the traitors that they are, and they shouldn't be spared justice either.